bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschehen? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And this is Dan Baltic.
And we're here with our friend and fellow traveler, Astral. Astral, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's a real honor to be here. I'm thrilled to be with you.
Yes, and we're thrilled to have you. For anyone who doesn't know, Astral you're a blogger, you're a podcaster. You kind of came onto the scene at a somewhat similar time to us. And as we were kind of just talking about, I think that your pod and your blogging and our podcast and what we're all about, we're kind of on the same wavelength. Your podcast is, would you say it's pretty literary focused, right?
I try to make it that way. Yeah, I do veer off the topic, but that is my primary interest. It's my primary topic of knowledge. I have how do I say this? I'm formally trained in writing and literature.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what I aspire to do. Just took me decades longer than I expected when I first started.
Oh yeah, well we get that. I think correct me if I should know this out of my head, but correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, or if you don't want to even say this, but you were an English major too, right?
Oh yeah, no, I was an English major and a creative writing minor. So
yeah.
I trained to not have a job. So I went to law school, obviously.
Yeah. No, and I was an English major. As you said, Astral, it's like we're very much cut from that same cloth. All three of us, I think. It's like you go to college, and are also our mutual friend TR Hudson. I think this applies to very well.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, the thing it's a common type across, like, I don't know, a certain kind of educated guy. Where you're just literary. You read novels, you want to write. You like both writing fiction and writing about fiction, and then the real world. You realize there's not a lot of money in that. You go off, you have whatever career, but some of us kind of find our way back to doing it online. And in our case, we do it online with a sort of political or cultural edge to it toward a certain purpose. And we find ourselves at a pretty similar space.
I tried to do that life for a little while, and it got to a point where I was like, okay, this is not for me. I'm basically just a fucking bum. I did produce some writing, but I got my shit together, and I didn't go to law school, but I went to training in a vocation and got a career and moved on. But, I've always wanted to do something literary, and it's, maybe we can talk about this later, but I never really produced the amount of writing that I wanted to. It's fulfilling to write on your own for yourself, but to really produce a volume that's like you can do something with takes a dedication that I never had really. But I'm finding podcasting to be, and I imagine you guys feel the same way, a good outlet to kind of fulfill that need, scratch that itch without having to totally dedicate your entire life to it. You're able to share your ideas, you're able to share your thoughts, your perspective. You meet like-minded people such as yourselves. I wanted to say my two goals when I started my podcast, which is, it's a modest podcast. It's only been going on for about 2 months. I have a decent amount of subscribers. But my two goals were to meet like-minded people and make new friends, which I'm already doing, which I'm thrilled about. And the other one is to make the Thiel bucks, but those haven't come yet.
That's a similar occurrence for many people, I have heard.
Yeah, no. Again, that's like the more I hear from you, the more it's like, yeah, pretty relatable for our pod. I mean, as you said, it is a really nice, a really good creative outlet. One of the great upshots of it is definitely meeting people online. And I'm happy to say, like, your pod and ours. We've got a lot of mutual friends. I couldn't help it. I mean, our last two guests have been Raw Egg Nationalist and Gio Panicetti, two people that you've interviewed in the last like 2 months as well. Like we're definitely within the same network of people, but it's a great group of people, and like people that you learn a lot from and people that you enjoy knowing. And then even on the Teal Bucks, it seems like I mean, I don't know I don't know much about the mythic Teal Bucks, but they seem to be out there in some capacity. And I do think this ecosystem we're operating in with these podcasts is like we are cultivating, a new kind of subcultural ground, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say we were cultivating mass. I don't even know if the Teal. Did you get that reference?
No,
I don't even. Okay. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Gotcha.
I don't even know if the Teal Bucks exist, to be honest with you, but they say that it does. But with or without that, something's going on. There's a subculture
Absolutely.
is being born. And I told you guys before, I was like slightly like, I don't even know what the word is, intimidated, maybe dismayed and anxious when I found your pod, because I was like, fuck, somebody beat me to it. These guys are doing exactly what I want to do. Oh, and right. And this is to your point about how we had the similar guests. So I'm like, great, we got all the same guests, and those guys were doing it before me. But I listened to a bunch of episodes, which were all very good. And I realized that there is enough of a difference between what we do and everybody's, because everybody's going to bring their own individuality to it. Everybody has their own individual perspective. In fact, I'm looking forward to hearing your take, and, we can get to it when you're ready. But we're going to talk about some books and some stuff that I've written about. And I'm really excited to hear the different interpretations. That's one of the things, not to be too tangential, that's one of the things that's really fulfilling about what we do. And tell me if you guys have had this experience. You'll read a book, and at some point, maybe right away or maybe years later, and it'll strike you like, I get it now. I get it. The whole thing clicks, and you share it with somebody, and or several people. And some people come back and say, I never saw it like that, but you're right. I get it. And they'll start asking you questions, but other people will come with their interpretation, and it'll be totally different. And you're like, well, man, I had the whole thing figured out, and I never would have seen that. But you're right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no.
And also, it's just like the space that we're in is the fact that we both have podcasts that are similar, to me, is a good thing. It's a good sign.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a sign that the space that we're in is growing, and that, we probably, practically speaking, are boosting each other's audience just by existing, because people listen to your pod and they're like, oh, I want to, hear more about dissident literature. Let me look into this. And then they find us, and vice versa, I assume.
Yeah. It's a kind of mutually affirmative, like almost proof of concept on each other's part. It's like, if someone else had the same idea and someone else out there thought it was a good enough idea to bring it into fruition. I mean, it's basically affirmative. And then it's not like podcasts are in competition. No one's out there saying, I only listen to one podcast. People want to hear more. And even if it's the same guest, if someone's really interested in that person, they'll actually seek out, further interviews. So I think it's a really good effect. And to that point, it is, something's going on subculturally. And, I think podcasting, it can be a very, sort of non-egotistical art form. It's all about, it's a very pro-social, kind of sharing the mic, sometimes literally, helping to boost each other is what podcasting is all about. It's like the good element of social media meets, something artistic. And I think that's one of the, if you look at other really successful podcasts, like the Perfume Nationalist, for example, pretty much all of the major guests that Jack regularly has all have their own podcasts. And people used to crack jokes about that, like, oh, everybody's got a podcast, but it's kind of like the metaphor. It's not like competing sports teams or something. It's like bands in a scene. You know what I mean? Like, no one's like, oh, I can't be friends. Like, there's a lot of punk bands and they all play together. That it's like that. It's that kind of deal, I think.
Yeah, and they feed off each other. You want to know how I see it though? Is it's like a revival or an evolution of like the literary criticism scene, especially the journals of like the 60s and 70s when it was really thriving. um Part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because I was always my whole life voraciously consuming magazines like the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the
Yeah.
New Republic, mainly for like the literary reviews and even some online stuff. And I slowly noticed, and it was slow. I mean, I watched the process. Think about being my age. I'm Gen X. As I did watch this whole process play out over time, and I was in denial about it for a while before I finally realized what was happening. Was everything went woke,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and identity politics and ideology snuck in, and it totally defined all. Uh, it defined culture, but it also defined criticism. You know, and it's like
Yeah.
like that's the antithesis of what criticism is supposed to be. So I like to see what we're doing as like the 21st century version of the literary criticism scene. Like I see you guys as journalists, and I see myself as like a journalist. You know,
Absolutely.
I'm glad you said that, because in our sphere, right, journalist is like the biggest insult possible. But I do, and of course we're not journalists. It's not what we're doing, but we're replacing them. You know what I mean? We're stepping up and
Exactly.
filling the void that because they fucking dropped the ball. Fuck, can I swear?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
you
Well,
definitely
not of
can.
course. Some people don't like swears on their pod, but we're a pretty we're a pretty like degenerate pod, I would say.
Yeah.
Swearing
Speaking
is, yeah.
of degenerate, I was a New Yorker subscriber for many, many years.
Me too, bro. Me too.
And yeah, New Yorker, Atlantic, all of them. And the same thing happened. You know, eventually it got too woke, and you can't really you know, if you have that mind virus, like you can't really write about anything in a really informative and insightful way anymore. It's totally compromised, and it's impossible to like read that stuff and, you know, come away with anything meaningful. So yeah, I don't subscribe to the New Yorker anymore. I don't subscribe to any of them. And that's like a big reason why we started this pod, is because it's Matt and I were talking about it, and we're like, well, there's nothing like this out there, and we want to build something that we would want to listen to or we would want to read.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're kindred spirits for sure. I don't know if you guys like reveal what your ages are or anything, but can you imagine? I mean, maybe this applies to you personally, but for me as an older guy, can you imagine being a young man growing up underneath the thumb of this? You know what I mean? Like you're
Oh my
having
God, it
the
seems
same
terrible.
curiosity that we have and the same interests that we have, and you go out into the world like excited to try. And I think I kind of talked about this with Lomez a little bit. You try to discover other like-minded people, and you want to have these conversations, and then you fucking pick up something like the New Yorker or something even worse like Harper's or Atlantic, the New Republic, which is Mark Zuckerberg's, of course, right?
I think so.
Yeah, it is now. And I don't, it would be very difficult. I think at least it would be more difficult for a guy like that to let this part of himself like flourish. Actually, you had TR Hudson on. He's a younger guy.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, maybe you're the same age. I don't know.
So, I mean, well, I'm okay age doxing. I'm 27, so I count as.
Okay, yeah. So you guys are the same age.
Yeah, I think TR and I are similar age. Yeah.
I'm 36, so I am at the elder side of the millennial, you know, grouping. Matt is at the younger, I guess, side of the millennials.
Yeah.
So we span the generation here.
Span the generation. But to your point, Astral, I mean, I think it's gotten worse even since I was in high school and since I was in college. But I definitely, that's a big part of my origin story was as a young man interested in literature, interested in criticism and stuff about literature, interested in the life of the mind, and kind of seeing that in real time go from, you know, pretty woke to extremely and totalitarianly woke over the span of I was in college from 2013 to 2017. So you can imagine, you know, 2013, 2014 is when a lot of it was really getting started. And I was like, this shit is insane, but it was obviously picking up steam. And then after Trump, forget it, you know, it's just been completely totalitarian, no, not totalitarian like totalitarian government, but you know what I mean, totally totalizing in its grip on the culture.
Totally.
This kind of stuff, the wokeness, or I mean, whatever you want to call it. Wokeness doesn't even do it justice, but you know, and as a young white guy with an interest in the life and the mind, it's like, you know, this persistent message of like, we don't want you, like, please leave. Like that's pretty much what it is constantly. That kind of stuff, not to self-plug too much, that kind of, I've written one novel. I'm not a prolific fiction writer, but I've written one novel. It's out on Terror House, and that sort of perspective definitely finds its way in there, because it was definitely an interesting and troubling time to come up in. And you know, I tried to sort of redeem myself with it, and I used to be a lot more liberal than I am now, but at some point you just kind of reject it, and you know, fully. We talked about this with Raw Nationalist last week. It's like, do you have, you know, he talked about how he's always been like kind of based, like just kind of been into nutrition and a bit of a traditionalist for almost as long as he can remember. It's almost like you're either like that or you have a kind of road to Damascus moment. I'm a little more road to Damascus, and it kind of came after a long period of living under this. I'm curious. I mean, I was going to ask you, like, not to get too into detail if you don't want to, but kind of what your origin story into getting on this corner of Twitter was.
Okay. Well, the thing is the route that I took. Well, because I kind of had two moments, I don't know what to call them, just two moments. The first was discovering Bronze Age Pervert.
Mm-hmm.
The second was similar, but also wholly different, and that was discovering Zero HP Lovecraft. And they're very distinct experiences of discovering the two for me. But by the time I discovered Zero, I have already fully kind of shed my former life as a normie, and was fully red pilled. So the experience of discovering his work wasn't much about the politics, and it was much more about the art. So just to quickly give the story, because I talked about this in my episode with Yarvin, but because it was Yarvin, I didn't want to talk too much. So I didn't really fully tell the story, you know, and it's really a story of like my entire life story that kind of led me to where I am.
I hear you. Yeah.
But to, you know, fast forward to speed run the first 20 years of my adulthood. Growing up in the late 90s and the early 2000s, I was pretty much an unaffiliated leftist anarchist, but not in the vein of the Marxists bent, or the Black Bloc people, or whatever they are now, Antifa. Yeah. Do you guys remember Black Bloc, or do people know who that is?
Well, from the WTO.
Exactly. See, and I try to actually kind of gave up on this, but I'll revive this argument that it was actually redeemable to be a leftist back then, because of the things you were against were like the WTO and like the invasion of Iraq and things like that, and Bush. But I don't want to give people the wrong impression though, because anarchism has a tradition of having Marxist and socialist ideals, but it also has a tradition of being like violently opposed to socialism and Marxism. And American anarchism has a very different strain than European anarchism does, and it doesn't have as much of like the socialist ideals behind it. It has much more to do with like the personal independence and like the frontier spirit. So the guys that really were inspiring me were like literary guys: Hunter S. Thompson, Robert Anton Wilson, Philip K. Dick, what's his name? Less so Terrence McKenna, but I was, and Ken Kesey, Jack Kerouac.
Yeah.
Well, these are probably all names that you guys know.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I mean much more in that vein.
Oh, for sure. So I mean, it's almost like this mythic thing called the left libertarian. I don't know if that's how you describe it, but that's
No, but you're getting at exactly what I was saying about the word anarchism. I'm actually I don't really like any of these words. I don't like right wing. I hate libertarian, but it's accurate. It definitely describes my mindset at the time. You know, and I was a young guy, and it was like much more about like being rebellious and being independent, right? As time went on, I sort of kind of morphed into a normie. I had kids, I had family. Obama became the president, and although I don't think he was a good president, things kind of like chilled out in America for like a while. You know what I mean? Like things seem to stabilize, and you kind of could get away for a little while with being disconnected, apolitical. Occupy Wall Street happened, and you're kind of like into it and behind it, but it wasn't life changing. It didn't cause any major, it wasn't the 2020 riots. It didn't cause any major
it's an interesting
waves. It
comparison.
didn't cause any major waves
Not
in
at
the
all.
culture. In fact, looking back on it, right, it looks like it was the death of something, and sort of something rose from the ashes. And what rose from the ashes was like 2015, 2016. Now, believe it or not, I kind of sat all that out. I kind of stayed a normie, really, really up until probably like 2020 COVID. Now, in the meantime, I had come across Yarvin and Moldbug's work because of people I met online, just talking about philosophy and literature. His name would come up a lot, and that eventually led me to BAP. And like, I don't want to get too political, but you can't talk about Bronze Age pervert without talking about the politics, right? Especially since
true.
I'm a avid, devoted listener to his podcast.
No, as am I. I think I'll just say that for common
you gotta
ground.
be, right?
Yeah, no, I know some people would snicker at this, but I'm pretty much. I'm not saying that I like live the BAP lifestyle fully, but like if there's like he's pretty much the person that I listen to the most.
Yeah, dude.
You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
Exactly. That's the package I'd recommend to anyone. But go on.
So here's the thing. All of that was to say that when I listened to BAP, it was like, okay, so the first thing is that like I became aware who he was for a while, and I thought he was just a joker and a troll, basically. And I thought it was a good troll, and I thought it was funny. I didn't realize how much was behind everything he was doing. Like, and that was for like years. He didn't have that big of a following on Twitter. I didn't really pay attention to him. And I didn't think there was much more behind like trolling fatties and ugly people and stuff like that, right? Excuse me. I go to YouTube and I just type his name in to see like what's up with this guy, what's the deal. And the first thing I see, literally, was his Mishima, Younger, and Celine episode. Did you guys see? It's episode 14, I believe.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
Yes. Yeah.
And like, dude, okay, so yeah, it was like 2020 at this point. I'm like 40 years old. I had never met another human being who had ever read Celine. I had never talked to anyone who had ever read Celine, even online. And Mishima, I had talked to a couple people here and there because PewDiePie had
right
him.
And BAP was in that episode. I remember BAP made a big deal out of that, and it was maybe a big deal that PewDiePie
and it may have been because of BAP. Some people think that it might have been because of BAP that he promoted him.
Have you heard that theory? No, but basically, I can't say for sure, but big if true is what I'd say to that.
So so there's a theory that PewDiePie excuse me, wouldn't say BAP's name because he was afraid of, like, he had already gotten in trouble, I think, for saying hard R and maybe some other things.
Yeah, a bunch of stuff.
And the rumors were amongst our friends anyway that he didn't want to like stir the controversy up again, so he just went with Mishima. I can't confirm whether or not that's true, but I like to think that it is true.
Yeah, but anyway, it's not like a neutral writer to say that you like. You know what I mean? PewDiePie definitely meant something by that.
For sure. It was a whistle. It was a whistle. As the leftists like to say, it was a dog whistle. But the point is, though, his name had been coming up more because of that by the time I found this episode of BAP. And I Caribbean Rhythms, and I was like, who the fuck is this guy, right? So I listened, and it was like I had found the voice in my head that had been there for probably a dozen years, that was far more articulate and well read than my voice, but had the same take, only more so, that I had on the world. But so much of it, I can't find a better word than just say suppressed. Like, I suppressed it, and I'm not ever gonna try to claim to know him, to know BAP, or to really have any line of communication with him. But when I read his book, so I listened to the podcast, I read the book, And I had been going through some shit in my life, and reading the book helped me sort it out. And I had randomly like contacted people online here and there, and the most I'd ever gotten in my life was like oh, thanks for reading, signed so and so. And so I didn't expect anything back from him. This was back when he had his Bronze Age Mantis account.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I sent him this long DM, and I didn't know that he had this big following. I didn't know anything about his like scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I basically just explained to him like what I was going through in my life, and like how he helped me sort it out and like overcome it. And I mentioned Mishima, and he sent back like a thoughtful thank you.
Yeah.
And like said some shit about Mishima, and it was like I was sold. You know what I mean? Like I was totally fucking sold, hook, line, and sinker. So,
yeah, I had a similar experience with him where I DM'd him, and I didn't expect to ever get a reply. It actually took like 6 months, and then just out of the blue, he'd gotten back to me and given me a thoughtful reply. And yeah, he's really a nice guy.
he's really, something. He's unique. Yeah. He's unique. So now, I won't. You know what I said? I'm not going to get all political, and I won't, because anybody listening who's familiar with BAP will understand the political side without me enunciating it.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to tell that because it felt like a personalized experience. You know what I mean? Totally. I've actually, whatever, I've had like, I've talked about this before. People have made fun of me for it who don't like BAP. And I'm like, well, that's why like it's our thing and not yours. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. No, I totally. That's why I think I even said earlier when I was saying that I'm also like a devoted listener to Caribbean Rhythms. It's like, yeah, there's people who are always willing to make fun of you for it. Or like pretend like they want to say like there's this notion that like all of BAP's followers are like weird, like beta orbiters. Not that's the wrong word in this context, but like weird, like there's this notion that they're all like followers who like
LARPers.
Yeah.
Would you say LARPers?
I guess LARPer. I don't know what the perception is. I don't think it's true though.
No,
it's
wrong.
Everyone,
it's false.
Yeah, and they're like everyone, BAP's not responsible for the activity of all his fans, but I don't think it's I'm not like some and that nothing even matters. I don't want to sound defensive here because it's not even something that I have any worry about, nor should you. But like, I don't think I'm like some ill-defined guy who like needs some like figure of masculinity to like glom onto. I don't think that at all. I just really have learned a lot from his podcast and from his writing, and I think that he is low key. Not that I necessarily endorse everything to the T in every context, but like he's one of those guys like kind of right about everything, like you listen to his take and it's like, at least from his perspective, like, like his views on things are very cohesive. I think Zero on our show pointed this out, like his ability to kind of the accounts that he boosts and the people that he praises, like he's never really been like wrong about anyone.
Yeah, I know.
He's just very smart is maybe the short of it. And his message is very holistic, sort of also with growing nationalists in a similar way, where the stuff he's advocating. So here, put it this way, not to go too deep into my own story, or whatever, but like, there's a lot of dissident right figures out there. A lot of them are smart, but some of them, advocate different things and advocate IRL political activity that can make chaos out of your life. If you were a Spencer follower or even like a America First person, like I don't like spending hours watching these live streams and stuff. Like I actually think that can be a very socially isolating thing. It can make you do and say stuff that like can negatively affect you at work and all this. And obviously all of us are dealing with controversial stuff, but BAP's message and people and the general kind of frog Twitter vicinity that we're talking about and that we're sort of a part of, I have found that stuff has improved my life. The more I read of it, the more of the lifestyle stuff that I kind of try and emphasize. Like there's a real care there about the kind of vitality and wellness of the audience that I think is what makes it really stand out.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. I agree 1,000%. But notice though that like these people in these spheres, because you could name many others, but Bronze Age Pervert, Raw Egg Nationalist, the thing I love about these guys is that they are so literary. I mean,
yeah.
To reiterate, that episode of Caribbean Rhythms was about 3 writers who write fiction.
Yeah.
Raw
and
Nationalist,
not very well-known writers either. Very esoteric
Yeah.
writers. So yeah, he definitely has a in-depth knowledge.
And then Raw Nationalist does Man's World. I haven't listened to the episode yet. You guys just put it out like 2 days before we started recording. But he does Man's World, and he was kind enough to publish me, which I like. I'm still like, oh, he's probably just. When I first came to Twitter and had like 30 followers, I hit it off with this one random guy. Well, he's not random, but I don't want to start like name dropping too much. But
it's okay. Yeah,
he put me in a group chat. This guy like right away, and Raw Nationalist was in there, and when he started putting me in Man's World, I was like, oh, well, he's just like, taking me under his wing. He doesn't really think I'm a good writer. Like, but like every episode, or excuse me, every issue, he's like, hey, I need a piece. Like maybe, you were tweeting about this. Why don't you write me a piece for Man's World about that? And I'm always like, all right, that's my big Twitter brother. Like, take it. Like I'm his charity writer, but I don't know. Maybe he sees something in my writing that's redeemable enough to put it in there. I don't like to think he wants to publish Drek. But anyway, my point is these guys, literature and a literary revival is like centrally important to these guys. And actually, let me talk about Zero for a second, real quick, because I didn't mean to come on here and like do commercials for all these guys. But
no, it's okay. Yeah. Again, we have a lot of mutual friends. I knew we'd be talking about them.
Yeah, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So I had my experience discovering Zero was like I lived out a short story I came up with. And I actually told him once, like in a good way, that reading his work kind of negated some of the work I had been doing. Like, and I like deleted a couple stories because I'm like, it's kind of like what I was saying when I found your podcast. I was like, all right, somebody already got here first, like, and he's doing it way better than I ever could have. But actually, a quick side note about that, what I ended up doing is starting the stories over again, and they're way better than they were the first time. So actually,
that's great.
That's the anxiety of influence, right? But I had written this story, this dystopian story about a kid living in the future of this, like, and this was before I found BAP that I wrote this. It was just like when I was going through the process of like realizing that like something had gone horribly wrong in the world, and I had like been ignoring it while it was going down, and like, you know what I mean? So I wrote this story about this kid in the future in college, and he's like this optimistic young college student, and he it's this like future dystopia of this like feminist matriarchal world where all you learn about, like, it's like a socialist government where all your needs are taken care of, and you don't need to work, and you don't even need to go to college, but you go to college as like this indoctrination thing, and they act and they deploy the education as if it's the same thing that it used to be, where you go here to learn and like get a job, but when you get out, you really just you go live your socialist existence where you get you wait in your bread lines and things like that. Anyway, the point is like this kid's having like feminist and like gender, LGBTQ ideology pounded into him, and he finds this like mysterious book in the library that you end up finding out that like this professor planted there for him, and he helped him find it behind the scenes, and he brings it to the guy and says like, hey, what is this, and the guy's like, oh, that's Ernest Hemingway, and do you want to read Charles Bukowski and Jack Kerouac, and he shows him all this stuff. And in this future dystopia, like all those books had been like erased from history, but this one like old professor had like snuck it in, and was like, it was this underground thing, right? Of men like keeping the flame going of this like male literary culture. And when I found Zero's story, I read both a God-Shaped Hole and I can't believe I can't believe I just blanked on that. And I read them like back to back, and I was like, I'm the fucking guy from my story. And Zero's work is like the shadow canon that I invented. Because I was like, it had already been out for like years when I found it, and I'm like, something has been going on. I thought BAP at that time back then was an anomaly, and I just thought like he was just like this one man show, and there wasn't this wider culture around him. I didn't realize that yet. But once I read Zero's work, and I also contacted him, and I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. I realized that like something was going on underground, and that the internet was being used as this like new tool to create this thriving new underground culture, just like the literary culture that I admired from the 60s and 70s and even the 40s and 50s, which was underground then. It was being recreated. And that, by the way, is when I was like, holy fucking shit, Moldbug predicted all of this. Like,
Yeah.
And so I just like kept having these like aha moments, like over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So that's like why, you know, I started writing again. Well, I had already been writing, but I started writing more seriously, I guess, like, which is crazy to say that, because I went back to school for a second bachelor's, and I have 3 kids now, and I bought a house, and I decided to like become a writer again, which is like fraught with, you know, obstacles. but
yeah.
You know, we talked about it's fulfilling in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And crucially, we have a scene. We have, you know, I don't know if your audience is huge. My audience certainly isn't huge, but at least
it's not huge.
Put out. The work can be put out and talked about, even by, you know, even if not a lot of people are doing so. It's part of a network of ideas. That's one thing. That's what I think has kind of been taken from us as men of a certain stripe who are interested in literary matters, is the ability to do that. I mean, it's not just that like, with the mainstream publishing world and the mainstream literary world, it's not like, I have to like take a back seat. It's like literally there is not a place to put my work. There's not a place that'll publish it. Whereas our scene, you know, it can be plugged right into a network of like-minded people. And I think that's what's so cool about it. Yeah.
I mean, whereas crucially, you can't find readers outside of our scene. In the mainstream audience, like, yes, you won't be published, but in addition to that, who would read it? Like the average New Yorker reader is like a 35-year-old liberal woman. She doesn't want to read our shit. Right. And the problem is, like, most normie men don't read anymore. They're like, oh, this is gay, I don't want to read this shit. And so they just stop reading. So like men's literature is dying on the vine. And that's why our scene is so important, because, you know, it's we literally have to go underground to write.
Right. And for as esoteric as a lot of it is, and kind of for a niche audience, something like Man's World, I mean, it has some of the esotericist stuff for sure, but like Man's World is very appealing. I think if a normie picked that up, they'd be like, this is fucking cool. And the literature in here is cool. And the pictures in here are cool. You know what I mean? So like, not, you have like a kind of inner party thing where it's like more, you know, not like Bronze Age Permanent said, you know, Bronze Age mindset is not for everyone, but like Man's World is, is kind of like that, but also has like a much more popular aesthetic to it. So I think we're kind of even moving out of that inner circle, and we're starting to take over the world, hopefully.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because it took me, you know, dozens of episodes to really, I was right there with him from the jump, but it took me like a while to realize like how sophisticated he is. And I think a lot of people have this experience with him. Like he's so engaging that like after a while it dawns on you like, wow, actually what he's doing is like really sophisticated and really a high level of intelligence. And the guy has a lot of forethought.
Oh yeah, I mean he's ridiculously well educated. You know what I mean? I this is a bit of a tangent, but I don't know if you've read much Camille Paglia.
Yeah. Of course,
like Camille Paglia is not as based as Bat, but like that's the comparison I make. It's like someone who has like this crazy electric intelligence, which is like the marriage of like a razor sharp perspective, but also like a wealth of cultural knowledge and anthropological knowledge, and the whole package of it is just like bombs go off in your mind every minute. There's very few people like that.
Crucially, also the style and ability to execute it and deliver it in an engaging manner, and like that he exceeds par excellence there.
I wanted to say one time I was going to tweet. I try not to be too meta on my Twitter though about having a podcast. But so I didn't tweet it, but I wanted to tweet like, have a podcast and not compare yourself to Bronze Age Pervert Challenge. Impossible. You know what I mean? Like, every time I start thinking about how I could never be like him, I'm like, all right, stop thinking that. Don't think that.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That's not what you're trying to do. You're not trying to be like him. Like,
well, he's too singular to even try that with. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he's like, I wouldn't even try. You know what I mean? But yeah, no,
Yeah.
But what I want to say though is that he is purposely setting up a high barrier to entry. He's a very good doorman to like. If you don't get what he's doing, and if you're not on the same page with him, like you're not going to stick with it. You're not going to like go fully down the rabbit hole with him because you're not going to be able to like put up with how hard he goes on everything all the time. But if you're with him, you're going to love it and you're going to want more of it. And you're going to want him to go even harder. Whereas I don't think that that's what everyone. Yeah, right. I can go longer and harder than you, my tan friend.
Couldn't help but think of that, but yes.
Oh man, my old account. You guys didn't know me on my old account, probably.
No, yeah,
I don't think so.
Yeah, I like had no prospect of ever putting my voice out there, and I didn't have a podcast, and I didn't really have a blog. So I just fucking said anything and posted anything, and I I made this edit of her Claire Lehman that was just fucking scandalous. I still have it. Maybe I'll post it.
Yeah.
If people want to request it. This is deep internet lore now though, to even reference Claire Lehman in regards to BAP. But
no, I remember that tweet exchange. That
course.
was fucking brilliant.
Yeah, it was. You should see my I made a video, but what was I gonna say? Oh, so Man's World. I'm sorry. Man's World, and what I'm trying to do, and I think what you guys are trying to do, doesn't have the high barrier to entry. We're pretty normie friendly. From what I haven't heard every episode of your guys, but I don't foresee finding episodes that are like going to get you guys pulled from the internet, which I think is great.
No.
I don't aspire to that at all. And Man's World is like very marketable to a wide audience. And I really hope he blows the fuck up. I mean, he kind of already is, right? He did the Tucker thing.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Completely. Yeah. And you know, and InfoWars. I think that's a good point. Like, I think, this gets into some of the stuff that people are talking about, like the anon versus not anon versus some nuanced in between thing question. And like, I think it's really important that there are accounts out there that are totally anon, like BAP, like Zero. And they really go for the jugular in terms of what they're talking about. But then there's also, I think, a place for it's always smart to be at least a little bit anon, but like, a little bit less explicitly OPSEC all the time, like in terms of voice doxing, like us, and a little more normie friendly. Cause I think, and someone like Yarvin, who used to be anon and is now a public figure, it's like, there should be like, people who are really singular and really kind of unfiltered in what they say. But I think it's also important for there to be, more normie friendly stuff.
Yeah, and I think over time, I'm actively trying to go more normie friendly over time, because you could just get sucked into the vortex of like vitriol and backbiting and backstabbing. And I don't want to come here and talk politics, and but I do want to say, I don't know how long you guys have been. I'd like to hear your take on this too, but like the infighting has really like distressed me, and some people watch me have like fucking full blown meltdowns on the timeline because of people fighting against each other. But I realize like there's no big catalyzing thing going on right now to put everybody on the same side. So this is a group of people who wouldn't really be associated with each other unless there's like a Gamergate, unless there's a Trump, or unless there's like a COVID lockdowns to oppose. But on like the day-to-day, like I don't think this, like the right-wing sphere broadly, are groups of people that would associate with each other, because they seem to have very disparate opinions on different things and different priorities too, which is fine. I don't really like have an issue with someone who thinks differently than me. There's very few, ideologies or thoughts on the right conservative side that I have a problem with as a philosophy. It's the people and the way they act that I dislike. And I just think that they're just bored and they're just
Yeah.
going after each other because they don't have anything better to like focus on at the moment, which is why guys like us need to focus on art and literature and culture.
Absolutely.
And I think I'm trying to like make that exclusive, you know, and
I think there's just a lot of jockeying for status going on.
oh yeah,
And like, you know, that is something that people inevitably will do. But I think what you recommend here is the way out of it. You focus on what your project is.
Yeah.
And you don't focus on like, how do people respond to it? Who is like, you know, better than you or worse than you. You do your work and see how people respond to it.
You keep it affirmative. You keep it focused on something like literature and art, or in the case of BAP, it's both that, but also, or raw egg nationalists, it's that, and it's fitness and it's nutrition. You keep focused on the positive things, the stuff that really matters. You know, issues of vitalism and issues of promoting that, and then the smaller stuff, like, you know. Like I remember, like Amanda Milius brought this up on your show, Astral, about like gay marriage and stuff. Like, no, I don't want to be involved in like the nuances of like what homosexuality related policy should or shouldn't be, you know, acceptable. Like I really don't care about that. What I care about is art, and I care about vitalism. And I think that the accounts that I like care about art and care about vitalism. I'm obviously, go on. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. No, I just want to say I'm glad you brought up the Millions episode, because that's the episode in which I say I don't like politics. I'm subjected to politics, and like I feel like I have to engage with them, and that's why I said like that I was like a disengaged normie for a while, because like by the time Occupy was over, I was like, I'm fucking done caring about all this shit. These people are all terrible, sucky people who can't get anything done. And it's not my thing, you know, it's not my interest.
Yeah. And we have them on the right too. Here's where I'll get into infighting, although I'm not going to name any names because I don't even care enough about it. But like
exactly,
the let's just say the non-frog Twitter corner of the dissident right, you know, whether it's the Spencer people or even some of the America First stuff, it's like, it's just not fun. And a lot of it's just like sucky, sort of doomed to fail IRL activism. And I don't know, I'm not going to like totally dismiss all those people. Some of them have done good work, yada, yada. But like, you know, it's just I'm not interested in that explicitly political scene, nor do I think it's especially productive at this particular moment. I think maybe sometimes there's a time for organization and activism, but it's very much not now, which is another thing that people like BAP, you know, usually harp on.
Yeah. And you made a good comment earlier about how like certain guys will tell you how to live your life or tell you things to do in real life that will get you in trouble and sow chaos for your life, as opposed to people like Raw Egg and BAP are only telling you to do things that end up, you know, making your life better.
Yeah. It's like, you know, people cringe at like the manosphere thing, and a lot of manosphere stuff was cringe, but you know what I mean? Like manosphere, so the pickup artists, stuff like that funneled a little bit, you know, they all are, you know, reverent toward like Heartiste and stuff. And I think that there has been a kind of positive osmosis of some of that, like more base self-help culture, and that self-help, no one likes that, but like, you know what I mean? There's actually like coming from a place of like, you know, the red pill is always supposed to partially be about, you know, improving your lot in life and achieving your goals. The fact even, you know, BAP is very political and he's not about self-help, but at the same time, he's never lost that, you know, that he's in touch with that original thing of like, you have to do stuff that, you know, is going to work. You know, BAP doesn't talk about money a lot, but like even, you know, even stuff like that, there's always this advice, like you need to be, you know, self-sufficient and be able to survive. You can't just be a bleeding heart activist for like these doomed to fail political goals. Frog Twitter is much more in touch with that.
Yeah. And the other thing too is like focusing on culture. I mean, you guys tell me if you've had similar experiences to this, but like the only thing that's ever made me go out and change my life in like really dramatic ways has been literature. You know, one book I've read made me go do this. Like Kerouac made me get out of I actually wrote an essay on this on my old blog, which is now defunct, and maybe I'll revive it. But like Kerouac, right, gets this like reputation, and it's true, but unfortunately, this reputation makes some people denounce him, or maybe I fear prevents people from reading him for being a degenerate, because he did have at least one homosexual encounter right, which with was it with Norman Mailer or was with one of those
probably
guys?
Ginsburg.
No, it was the guy who Gore Vidal.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's others, but
and he was a marijuana smoker, whatever. Like I don't.
Well, he was a severe alcoholic.
Yeah.
He was a speed addict. And I mentioned the homosexuality, but he considers himself straight. He had like failed marriages, and he was an illegitimate father, and so he did not live a life that was admirable, and he did not make good choices at all, right? And I kind of renounced him like later, when I got married and stuff, because he had a big influence on me when I was younger. When I got married, had a kid, and I've always been like a one woman guy, like, and I was faithful to my wife forever. And we were together for a long time. Fortunately, it didn't work out, and I'm remarried now. But the point is, though, is I realized like, that's not me. That's not, those aren't my values. Like, I just thought it was cool. Like, it was just like a phase, and I renounced it all. Years go by, and I actually found Semmelweis, who sadly just got banned. Do you know him from Twitter?
Yeah, I don't know him personally. I know of him.
Well, that's what I meant. Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. Did you see his Kerouac book though? That
I heard
I'm familiar. I haven't read it, but yeah, the sort of right, like I wouldn't say like the Our Guy's reappraisal of Kerouac. Is very much here.
Well, in his later life, he did become somewhat reactionary, I believe. He certainly was no fan of the hippies.
No, or the communists. Yeah. He was an anti-communist, and he was a Catholic his whole life, and he identified as a Catholic his whole life. And him and Jerry Garcia both kind of looked at the hippies and were like, "Fuck, did I do that?" Like, but so I read the Semmelweis thing, and I don't think that guy would ever voice docs. I can't get in touch with him, but Semmelweis, if this ever comes across to you, like, get in touch with me on Twitter, and we'll do an episode on your book. Because that book, right, he kind of like reevaluates Kerouac, and it made me reevaluate Kerouac for myself. And I realized that like I had it all wrong. Like I had it all wrong because, now I'm in my 40s, right? And, this is kind of tough to talk about. And this is kind of the stuff that I was going through, that when I contacted Bap and told him his book, like, helped me sort shit out. But like dudes that I fucking hung out with growing up are like dead now. You know what I mean? Like, suicide, overdose, the ones who have families and shit, like they went through rehab and they've done prison time and like whatever, and it's pretty fucking bleak. And like Gen X, like, was, the nihilistic thing was like legit. And I came from like a decent middle class town, but it was just lower middle class enough that I was around some fucked up shit growing up. And the guys who didn't get into dope got into, were heavy drinkers. And no one that the only real panic attack I ever had in my life one day was when I realized that like I was the only person out of my friend group who like made it into adulthood, like well adjusted and normal without an addiction problem, and didn't do any time in jail or anything like that. So I read this thing from Semmelweis reevaluating Kerouac, and I realized that like Kerouac didn't drag me down. He fucking freed me from it. Like, he's the reason that I left my hometown. Like, he's the reason that I didn't like wallow in the addiction that like the kids from my hometown all got trapped in. Because I was like drinking a 12-pack on a Wednesday, drinking at 7:00 in the morning when I was like 19 years old, like hanging out with dudes who were like shooting up right in front of me. And I remember talking to this one guy who I randomly, like, it was like such a crazy span of events that I even ended up talking to this dude who fucking shot up in front of me while we were having this conversation. But we were talking about like the Grateful Dead and Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters and all that shit. And I hadn't read Kerouac yet. And he was like, dude, get the fuck out of this town. Like, what are you doing here? Like, you need to leave. You need to at least go to college in another town because you're like too smart for these people. And I'm not that smart. I'm not trying to say that I'm smart, but like the dudes I was hanging out with like had no aspirations in life. None of them had ever read a book. Like they couldn't even like talk, let alone like read. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do know what you mean, and it's not to put those people down, but like
yeah,
we
I'm
talked to.
not.
I'll let you get back to it because this is
No, it's okay.
amazing.
It's okay.
Thank you for like being so personal on our podcast. I think it makes for really good content. But like we had Caleb Cadell on a handful of episodes back, who wrote a novel about what he calls like the middle American. He calls his genre like middle American Gothic. I don't know if you heard that episode, but he has a. Dan, what was the book called again?
It's called The Neighbor.
The Neighbor, about, and basically just about a kind of a middle America, Midwestern milieu where kind of people just get stuck in addiction, and it's a very real thing. And I can't say that my background's like fully immersed in that, but I know the type, and I've kind of passed through those milieus, and like, yeah, no, people get stuck in towns. They never read a book. It's not because they're stupid, but like,
right.
You get sucked into that.
Crucially, this is all occurring in the context of globalization and all of that. And so like I have family in upstate New York, and I live in New York City, but for Christmas and what have you, growing up in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, 2000s even, we'd go upstate, and I loved being up there. It's idyllic. It's like it's small town. I grew up in the city. It's like it's much nicer. It was much nicer. But as time went on in the later 2000s, the decay just, you could see it. The jobs leaving, and the attached effects to the loss of jobs. It produced social decay, and that's sadly what's happening across America. And I don't know if that was your experience growing up, but I mean, it seems like it would sync up with the timeline of when things started to go awry in those places.
Yeah, that came later. That was more like looking back, like going back to my hometown and seeing like, the gas station I used to work at, which was like a independently owned auto mechanic shop that had, a little tiny convenience store and sold mobile gas out of it. And it was this like hometown guy who fixed cars, and like he worked on like the police cars of like the local cops and stuff like that. And it got bought out by people from another country who closed the shop, and like turned this little, quaint sort of convenience store that had like homemade bacon, egg, and cheeses into this like full on, Sunoco or Mobile or whatever convenience store. Which is whatever, it's fine, but like it's just like, of all the things that happen, like the local town diner is now like a Chinese restaurant, and little things like that. Like you go back to your hometown and you're like, everything's like gone. You know what I mean? Like like the people are still here, but like you don't know where they are. They're not congregating there anymore. Like the people going in and out of that gas station now don't all know each other like they did when I worked there. You know what I mean? Like,
and the houses, like houses that used to be well maintained, a lot of them look like they're falling apart. Yeah. And that's when you don't have money. Well, you don't maintain your house. And when you like have addiction problems, you're not going to be good at doing that either. And I don't want to, it's visible, the decay.
I don't want to get too far off topic of Kerouac, and I don't want to dox my location either, but I've always said that the Rust Belt goes pretty much like to Western Massachusetts. I don't know if you've ever been to the town where Jack Kerouac grew up, Lowell, Massachusetts, and there's a couple other towns around there. I can't think of the names of them right now off the top of my head, but they're just fucking skeletons. They're skeletons of towns, and there's like literal. I mean, I went and visited one of my friends who lives in one of the towns, who of course got a job working at like this like outreach center, this tiny little town. I don't know if you guys know Western Mass at all.
A little bit, actually.
Tiny bit. Yeah.
This is out by Lowell, but not quite as far. It's very rural, very small town. And of course, he's working at this like, halfway house for like local kids who are like on the street or have addiction problems and stuff like that. And he like took me to like the spot, like the hangout spot. And like he would like, try to get kids into like skateboarding and shit like that. And it was literally a fucking falling down abandoned factory. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, wow. So yeah, I always say that like the Rust Belt goes way farther east than people understand. But
Yeah.
That shit hadn't really been happening yet when I was having this experience. Like it was like right on the cusp of it. And I'm telling the story, like I'm thinking back. What actually happened when I met this guy who told me to get out of town and stuff like that, and like expand my horizons, was I was like 17. Because and I remember that now because I didn't read Kerouac until like 2 years later. And I read the Dharma Bums because I remember when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, whatever, I'm not one of those guys. You know what I mean? I'm not the type of person who does that. And then the next year after that, this friend of mine, the same guy I'm talking about in Western Mass, moved to San Francisco. And he was like, come stay with me anytime. And he worked for Greyhound at the time. And he's like, I can get you a free ride on the bus. And I was like, no, that's not my scene. And then when I was 19, I read the Dharma Bums and On the Road. And the whole point of all this was to say that it got me out of my hometown. It got me around different types of people that I wouldn't have been around if it wasn't for having done this. And like, it got me to see like different ways of life and just like the physical, layout of other places, because I lived in one of those cookie cutter towns that was like, as I explained before, like a holdover from the 50s that was like turning into like a box store / strip mall town. So it was like this homogenous culture, and I was hanging out in San Francisco and Berkeley, and we went up north to San Jose and other places. And I got to see like the world a little bit, you know what I mean? So then I liked it so much. I went to college out there for a year and came back and like, and then I lived all around the East Coast after that. And, I didn't fuck with drugs anymore. Like, and I never really had like a problem. Like I never really got like deep into it, but I was like a regular, drinker and smoker of marijuana and fucked with dabbled in some other stuff too, but like nothing too heavy. And, by the time I was like 24, I like hadn't smoked weed in like years, you know what I mean? And I realized later that Kerouac did that for me. Like he broke me out of it. And he was like a martyr, really. Like he was like a sin eater, if you know what a sin eater is.
I can imagine. Yeah, explain that though. Yeah.
Well, it's this like pagan idea. It's like kind of like equivalent to like a scapegoat.
Yeah.
Right. They take on like the sins of others and like they take the hit. You can like be free, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a fascinating archetype because you have a little bit of that with like, not to be blasphemous, but even like with Christ, like
that's exactly what he is. That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
and then in Buddhism, this is probably significantly different because this is a slightly less negative image. But you have like the Bodhisattva, which I'm not a scholar of Buddhism, but that's kind of someone who delays enlightenment in order to help people that are behind. I mean, it's a similar idea there too, perhaps, where it's like this. Yeah, it's some version. The Bodhisattva is not quite as on point because that's not quite a martyr figure. But yeah, the notion of the martyr. I think I might be frozen. Damn it! Can you guys hear me?
I hear you.
No, I hear you.
Okay, cool. I'll edit that out. You have the notion of the martyr, a figure like Christ, and that sin eater, sort of archetype. Yeah, I think that is a good way. That's kind of been my re-understanding of Kerouac as well. I had somewhat of a similar trajectory, maybe a little bit less of a profound existential influence on me, but like, really liked Kerouac as a teenager, thought he was all that. And then later was like, oh, actually this guy, he's kind of just like a proto hippie, whatever. But then like you come back to it's like, no, he doesn't represent like an ideal for living. He's not a role model. He wasn't enlightened or anything like that per se.
He was profoundly troubled, actually.
He was profoundly troubled, and he was profoundly troubled in a way that was reflective of the times in which he was living. And there's something to be learned in that, And I think that I haven't read the Semmelweis book, but there's definitely like a right wing or traditionalist sort of reappreciation for Kerouac that can occur. That, like, yes, on the one hand, he did hold slightly more conservative views toward the end of his life. That's part of it, but it even goes deeper, and that, he's just a figure who was reflective of his time. And there is a spiritual yearning that you get in Kerouac, a very frustrated spiritual yearning, and like, yeah, some new age types like him, but also like he was getting to the heart of some kind of alienation that was starting to happen even in the 50s.
Yeah, one thing that I'm kind of perceiving coming into these spheres is like there's been this sort of retconning of philosophical and literary figures, and they've been taken up by the mainstream. And I guess this is somewhat of a banal observation, generally speaking, because everyone kind of knows, like, once something becomes popular, it gets diluted and it gets ruined, and people who don't really understand the spirit of a band or an author or a philosopher, um it's picking up steam and it's hip and it's cool, so they're like hangers on, and those people kind of ruin, like, the group of people. They kind of ruin the scene for the people who are in the know and the people who really, like, get it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that happens with, like, online spheres as well too. But someone like Nietzsche and someone like Kerouac have been so thoroughly embraced by, like, just the most mediocre sort of mainstream people that really don't have anything to contribute to Kerouac's body of work. All they can do is, like, suck it of its vitality. And Kerouac has been this sort of like hallmarky, like, oh, see the world, discover yourself thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's what happened to me. That's what I did. But, like, it's not pretty. It wasn't pretty for me, and it wasn't pretty for Kerouac, and, like, it's not a fun thing. It's and I think the university goes a long way in this, like, watering down, because you have these people who, like, sure, I don't want to take anything away from people who've lived, really, I'm just gonna say it. No offense to anyone personally,
Yeah,
but like, to me, it's always been like, if you've spent your 20s, going to undergrad, right into a master's, or right into a PhD, and then right into a professorship in academia, and I don't see how you've, like, lived a real life. Like, I don't I don't give you the credibility I give somebody else. And, like, dude, when I pick up a book, like, from an author that I haven't read before or don't know much about, and the first thing I see is, like, studied at this creative writing workshop, and went to this university and worked for this paper, I would, like, put it down. I'm like, I am probably not gonna, like, jive with what this guy says, you know what I mean? So people like that, they can't bring anything to this work. All they can do is, like, tear it down, like Walter Kaufman's, like Nietzsche. Like, back when I was, like, like, so many things occurred to me, right, when I was, like, on my own, that I didn't have anybody else to, like, bounce it off of, or anybody else to, like, reaffirm what I was saying. That's why BAP was so important to me, because, like, I had all these observations about things that were wrong in the world that no one ever affirmed until I found BAP, because no one fucking, you know what I mean? And one of those experiences I've had was, like, I had read probably, like, 5 Nietzsche books. Yeah, I read, like, 4, maybe 3 or 4 Nietzsche books on my own. And then when I discovered BAP, I, like, went back and read them again, and read, like, 2 or 3 other Nietzsche books.
Yeah.
But the first time I was reading him, I think I was reading, like, The Will to Power and The Gay Science, and I had the Kaufman translation of both. And I would, like, read it, and like, some of it's very straightforward, but some of it, like, I didn't know what he was talking about. So I'd go read the footnotes. And the footnotes, like, I didn't know anything about I had no idea what Nietzsche's relationship to academia was at the time. I had no idea what philosophers thought of him. and I had no idea who Walter Kaufman was. But I'm reading the footnotes and I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, this guy is totally trying to like twist what Nietzsche's saying and like find threads and connect things from different parts of his work to change the message. Like, this is total bullshit. And, you know, coming to this sphere, like, this is kind of like an accepted reality in our spheres. Like, yeah, academics are bugmen who don't know anything about real life, and they're going to take some vitalist author like Nietzsche and Kerouac, and they're going to water it down, and they're going to say it doesn't mean what it means,
yes,
in order to hammer it into some bullshit ideology and have it reinforced. And like, you know,
yes.
I still don't get the motivation. Like, I still don't get the motivation for like, Bap says in Caribbean Rhythms that like they had no choice but to try to retcon Nietzsche because like so many important people had read him and so many important people reference him, especially Michel Foucault, who's like the most important leftist philosopher thinker there is. He is like a footnote to Nietzsche. He is like, yeah, and he's open about it. So like, it's right there in broad daylight. So it's almost like they had to try to retcon him so that like if their students went back and read him, they're not going to be red pilled. They're going to be like, oh no, he doesn't really.
Oh, completely. I think
it's hard to cancel Nietzsche because he's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like there's other philosophers who are more esoteric who you could be like, yeah, no, you can't read that guy. But like Nietzsche, like you say, he's an influence on their guys.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Heidegger as well to a large extent.
Yeah, and he's
Nietzsche
a darling of academia.
Yeah, absolutely. Derrida, all the lefty post-structuralist, post critical theory thinkers, they all passed through Nietzsche and Heidegger. And I don't know if this was a conscious process of retconning for the reason you said, but I think on an unconscious level, that's what it is. I mean, these thinkers represent some of the most cutting edge and vital currents in Western philosophy. And there's a need to pass through them and sort of desaturate them of their power and turn them into something that is either kind of, weirdly leftist or like even just kind of just passive and
well, to defang them, basically.
To
make Nietzsche, impotent.
Definitely. And
absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the Walter Kaufman translations. I mean, those are the ones I've read as well. They may still be the prevailing translations. I'm not sure if there's anything wrong with the translations.
No,
yeah,
no.
Yeah,
not at all.
With the interpretations thereof. Nietzsche's a good enough writer that it all shines through anyway. But like, yeah, I think about this sometimes. As I said earlier, I was an English major. I was a philosophy major as well. I kind of considered a career in academia, which I'm glad I didn't do. Even that probably would have given me some, direction in my career that I may or may not currently have, because it would have been like, some kind of vocation. But at the same time, it's like, as you said, I don't think it's not a fruitful world to be a part of. And so anyway, I still have to say, like, I had that some attraction to academia, have, a degree of an academic background, although I certainly have no master's degree or anything like that. But I often think about, like, what would academics, some of whom I have a degree of respect for, even though I think what you said is largely correct about them being sort of disconnected from your life and being bugmen in 90% of cases. I do sometimes think, like, what would an academic make of BAP? And what they'd say is like, oh, this is like someone who, his stuff is not like peer reviewed.
Right.
And like, this is a misinterpretation, just like the Nazis had a misinterpretation of Nietzsche, which I think in that case, their interpretation probably was incorrect. But in the case of BAPS, who's to say that, like, who's to say exactly what Nietzsche thought? But I think let's put it this way, I think BAP's a hell of a lot closer than any of the prevailing academic trends. And it's with someone like Nietzsche, who is a vitalist and who did really emphasize the sort of existential importance of like putting your money where your mouth is with philosophy and having it, be part and parcel of your life, not just some masturbatory intellectual exercise. Who are you going to trust on Nietzsche? Are you going to trust the autodidact, who comes to this, on his own, sort of as he is, like BAP, and uses it toward a message of vitalism? Are you going to trust that person, or are you going to trust the person who has all kinds of other considerations, like getting tenure and like his career in academia? Like, obviously, whether or not Bap is perfectly right as a conduit of Nietzsche, I mean, I happen to think he is, but
Yeah.
whether or not he is, I think, I would leave that to the audience. Like, who do you trust? The person who sort of comes to this, in its own right, or the person who has all kinds of weird academic hangups? And I think there's definitely something to be said for our guys and for our sphere with regard to this kind of, hermeneutics and interpretation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing.
Yeah. So yeah, I did you guys read the essay on my blog called "The Failed Ubermensch"?
Yes, the
yes.
one about
with Raskolnikov
crime and punishment.
Yeah. And you guys have read Crime and Punishment?
It's been a while, but yes, I have.
Because I struggle with Zarathustra and whether or not. So the thing that I struggle with the most with Nietzsche is Zarathustra. The other books I think are very straightforward, but he's trying to. It's really admirable what he's trying to accomplish, and I think he maybe pulls it off. He definitely almost pulls it off, if not completely pulls it off, in that he's attempting to set up a system and create an exemplar to this sounds so ridiculous to say this out loud, to replace the exemplar of Christ in the Bible. He's trying to evaluate values, and I believe that there's the values of the past 2,000 years anyway.
Right.
And there's a book that I think started writing. And
that's right. The revaluation of all values.
Yeah, exactly. Like exactly. And I guess at the end of his life, when he was losing it, I forget exactly what he was going around saying to people, but I think he was calling himself like the new Christ.
He was calling himself the new Christ. He was calling himself Dionysus.
Yes. So he really was trying to create the gospel of the new man of the future, and that if we didn't listen to him, if we didn't heed his call, we were going to devolve into the last men. And I've spent years, Bap will just say it, like he'll just say it like Nietzsche was right about everything, but I like really struggle with it because it's like the implications of him being right are so fucking profound.
Yes.
That right, exactly. So Zarathustra, the first time I read it, I thought it was just LARPy 15-year-old kitsch. Like I was like, oh, some kid. Of course, this appeals to like high school kids who are like gonna go be the Ubermensch, and they're gonna go, get the girl. And maybe they got in like one fight in their life and like they did okay. And like now, like they're the Ubermensch and they're gonna like go, start the family or start their career or whatever it was. And like, I realize now that like, that's what the Academy is trying to turn Nietzsche into, and like Carl Jung, who I have immense respect for. I don't ascribe to all of his writing, but I have immense respect for him. And he kind of enunciated the process of individuation, which I think he was mostly correct about. But the problem with Jung and not Jung himself, but his legacy and Joseph Campbell's legacy and the hero's journey is like Nietzsche, who inspired both of those guys. Both of them were reiterations of Nietzsche. Their like hero's journey of self-discovery got turned into this like The Secret thing, and it like culminated in like Eat, Pray, Love. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think because of that cultural impression of Nietzsche and Zarathustra, I couldn't take it seriously the first time I read it, because I was like, nobody can do this. You can't be like this guy. So this has to be metaphorical. But the second time I read it, I took it deadly seriously. And I realized that what he's really saying in that book is that the only way to get ourselves out of the predicament we're in modernity is to take extreme and drastic measures like Zarathustra does and live your life like Zarathustra does, which is going to have massive negative consequences for you if you try. Therefore, not many people can embody Zarathustra, and it's going to be a long time before somebody finally does. And I wrote a piece on Mishima, which I sometimes worry I over romanticize his suicide. But we have to remember that suicide in Japanese culture is totally different than it is in American culture.
Yeah.
And it's like a way of retaining your honor. And I realized that like Spengler is also a grand elaboration on Nietzsche in many ways. You can't reduce Spengler to that. You can reduce some of these other guys to that, but Spengler, there's a lot more going on. But he has that grand, wonderful metaphor of the soldier at Pompeii, the legionary at Pompeii, who refused to leave his duty because he hadn't been, or he refused to leave his guard because he had failed to be relieved, and he didn't get the order to stand down, so he stood there while Mount Vesuvius washed over him. And Spengler kind of says that's it. That's the only option the West has, is to hold the lost position without hope. That's what it means to be a thoroughbred. So if you think about that in context of The Last Man, right? Nietzsche was surrounded by last men, and he says someday a Zarathustra is going to come and be an example to these last men, and most of them are going to just blink and ignore him, and they're going to laugh at him, but someone somewhere is going to like take the plunge and try, and that person is the tightrope walker. The tightrope walker is going to fall to his death, and it's going to be, and Nietzsche even said, I don't remember if it's in the book or if he just said it elsewhere, that like none of this stuff is going to even come to pass in his lifetime. And I don't think it's come to pass even now.
No, yeah.
So when I look at Mishima's suicide, I realized that like Mishima existed after the legionary had already succumbed to the onslaught of Vesuvius while holding the lost position. Someone like Mishima didn't have a lost position to hold anymore. And us in America now, like there is no lost position to hold. Like the lost position is already lost.
Yeah.
Okay.
True.
Hang on a second. So the way I see people like Mishima is like the only thing we can do before the Ubermensch truly arrives is to make moves as if we were striving for that. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like it's like a lifeline. We're like laying out a lifeline to show people like there is another way. Something was lost that we cannot live without, and if we can't get that back, some of us are going to have to go under. And going under, means many different things. It means succumbing to alcoholism like Kerouac did. It means outright suicide like Mishima. All right. So what it is that Nietzsche and Mishima are trying to elicit, and they're trying to bring about and manifest in the world, right, is a revival of an earlier, more noble, more vitalistic time.
Yeah.
When men were men and they were able to exert their will and if we're staying with the theme here, own space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So for Nietzsche, it was the blonde beast. It was the Germanics and the Anglo-Saxons of the past. Well, for the Europeans, I should say, the Vikings, the Germanic warlords of the past, the people who defeated the Romans in the Teutoburg Forest, the Germans who took over the Roman Empire. For Mishima, obviously, it was the samurai and Bushido. But for Americans, it's the cowboy and it's the frontiersman.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is what we're trying to revive. That is like when we were in our most manly and robust phase of our civilization. And this is like the civilization like of when it's developing, when the institutions are being built. This is all this very Nietzschean concepts where he's talking about like we're given liberties in liberal institutions, within the framework of liberal institutions, which are actually like a degradation of what true freedom is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The truly free men are the men who existed before the institution exists, who exerted their will that was able to bring about and give rise to these institutions, which is exactly what the frontiersmen did, and what the cowboys did, and what the Texas Rangers did, and men like that. And even the not the pilgrims, well, the pilgrims too, but I mean more like the pilgrims who went out west, like for the gold rush and stuff.
Yeah. Frontiersmen for sure.
Yeah.
Settlers.
The settlers. And Cormac McCarthy is a Nietzschean, if he's anything. And Blood Meridian, you know, I tried in my essay on Blood Meridian called Forcing the Unity of Existence, I tried to lay this out. I feel like I need to expand on that essay, but what I was trying to say in that essay, right, is that, like, if we trace the whole entire story of the frontier, the opening of the frontier to the closing of the frontier, we see like this type of man in his like fullest glory, you know, able to be totally free and unrestrained by anything, by women, by religion, by the law, by liberal institutions in any way. And he was beholden only to himself. And by the time the frontier closed, that type of man was no longer welcome. That type of man was no longer able to function within society, and society was no longer able to function with that type of man within it. And that type of man became what Nietzsche called the subterranean, and they're the criminals. And this goes back to Kerouac. He has a book called The Subterranean.
He does. Yes.
So I believe, my take on Blood Meridian, right, is that like the kid is born 15 years before the West opens, and the West is considered to open when gold was discovered in California, and that's when people started going there to try to like prospect for gold. And it caused this big rush for people to go there to like build cities and towns and trade up around the gold prospectors, which also kind of subdued the frontier for cattle ranching and building trains across the plains and things like that. But of course, it's incredibly dangerous, because not just because of the climate, and you're completely exposed to the elements as you're going and doing these things, but there's extremely hostile Indians there who were in fact the greatest war machine of that time. They had beaten the Mexicans and the Spanish before them, the Comanche in particular, the Apache as well, and others. But the Comanche are considered one of the deadliest warriors to ever roam, you know, the American West. They certainly dominated all of the other Native American tribes, but they even dominated, you know, Western people with guns and revolvers and rifles.
Yeah.
And if you've ever read the book Empire of the Summer Moon, it kind of explains
the familiar,
it explains the fighting tactics and how our men had to adapt to how the Comanche fought in order to beat them. But really, I don't even know, you know, how much more it would have lasted if we didn't evolve rifle technology, because the repeater rifle came out, which allowed us to fire off more shots than they could arrows. So they were probably doomed when that happened. But they also got hit with the plague and the Black Death, and that literally decimated half of their numbers. But up until that happened, like, we were kind of no match for them. Like, nobody was really a match for them. And this is the environment that these men were going into. And this is what the whole raison d'etre for the not the prospectors, but the filibusterers and the irregulars, Glanton's gang, is to deal with the Comanche, because the Mexican army just lost the Mexican-American War, and they couldn't beat them. They couldn't defeat them. So in order for America to move into this hostile territory, we needed Zarathustra-like figures who were not going to hesitate to do what needed to be done, who were not going to suppress their instincts, and who were not going to kowtow to polite society's expectations. In fact, a man who did so would not last he wouldn't even make it out of town, as the book shows. The book starts out with them committing violence against each other in town. And I think,
yeah, they like beat the shit out of a bartender, and then they light a hotel on fire.
And they try to kill each other. And one of these things, I forgot exactly which one, the kid gets a reputation for this. And Colonel White's filibusterers seek him out and say, hey, we need a guy like you.
Right.
We need a ruthless fucking cold-blooded killer to be on our team. Now, have you guys seen the movie Dead Man with Johnny Depp, or the movie Unforgiven with
Unforgiven for sure.
Clint
Love
Eastwood?
that one.
So I may not have, but go on. Yeah.
Unforgiven is not without some minor flaws, still one of the best movies of all time. And Dead Man is under fucking rated as well.
I'll have to look up Dead Man. I actually haven't heard of it.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. Johnny Depp in the headlines, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a black and white Jim Jarmusch movie. Have you ever seen any of his movies?
I have, yeah. He kind of does that mumblecore stuff, right?
Yeah, but you got to go to Dead Man though, because his movies took a decided turn later in his career, and they're nowhere near as good. They're definitely like hipster fucking pandering, you know, with Adam Driver, the emo guy.
Yeah.
Dead Man came out in like 95, and the dude Jarmusch was a badass back then, and the studio tried to like they had all these different ideas. They wanted to edit it a certain way, and they wanted to advertise it a certain way that he didn't like. So he said, fuck you, no, you can't do any of that shit. So it got like no advertising, it got barely any release. Like it was like an underground movie almost, you know what I mean? Like
interesting.
Yeah, so it was hard to find, or not, it was hard to know about really, because it got no advertising at all. But the point, you got to go see that if you're a fan of Blood Meridian. You got to watch both those movies because it helps set up a contrast and enunciate some of the things I'm saying here, that like the West closes and that type of man has to go away, and when the West opens, those types of men were in their prime. That was their time. And Dead Man depicts Johnny Depp as this like I think he's like an accountant, and he comes from Cincinnati. And I even mentioned in my essay, like a guy from Ohio with a desk job could never make it in these conditions. And I was referencing that movie because he's a guy with a desk job from Ohio. And you know, he gets like thrown out onto the frontier, and he has all these experiences, and he does turn into a killer, but almost like by accident. And he has a Native American kind of show him the way, and he ends up dying. I'm not giving anything away. The movie's called Dead Man because he's the whole movie's about him, though. The whole movie's about him dying, so it's not a spoiler. The whole movie is about him meeting his death on the frontier, because he is not the type of person who's supposed to be there. He is not the type of man made for that type of life.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think about the way Unforgiven, right? Like, when have you ever seen a Western like this movie? So that movie takes place in 1882, and the U.S. Census Bureau declared the West closed, the frontier closed in 1880. So that movie takes place after that era was over, and after that type of man was gone, the cowboy and the frontiersman. And in the film, it shows a young guy who's coming up from the new generation, and Clint Eastwood is the old man with the gunslinger reputation, right? And the new guy is like out for revenge, and he wants to be a gunslinger too, and he wants to be a renegade, and he has to like kill some people. He doesn't have the fucking stomach for it. Like, he can't do it. He shoots somebody in the stomach, and the dude has this like miserable, grisly, painful, pathetic death. And Clint Eastwood shoots that guy, and Clint Eastwood is like over it. He's like, fuck, you know, put him out of his misery, like shut him up, give him some water. He's begging for water, and he's like, give him some water. The point is that Clint Eastwood is like over it. He's gone beyond that phase and that era, and like he doesn't have the stomach for it anymore. And then the young guy shoots somebody, and he can't handle it either. It's the same thing for him. He's just as distraught about it. And at the end, The young guy like doesn't feel good about what they did. He doesn't feel like an outlaw, and Clint Eastwood just fucking disappears because he's like trying to put that all behind him. So my my interpretation of Blood Meridian, right, is that the judge represents death. And what is he the judge of? They say right in the book, like, he's never presided over a court case. He's not actually a judge. Why do they call him a judge? I think that the judge is the arbiter of like when your time is up. Like, he's not judging. Yeah, right. Just like death determines when it's your time. And I'd like to expand on this somewhere, like in an essay or something. But I'm certain that Cormac McCarthy took inspiration from the movie The Seventh Seal.
Yeah, I've read that in your thing. Yeah,
Judge Holden. Oh, did I put in the essay? I don't remember that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
yeah. Just kind of as an aside, but it made sense.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the Crusader, and he even say he has this whole existential crisis. He's like, who am I? What am I for? What is my purpose? Like, what am I doing here? I'm like a ghost. I wish I could remember the actual soliloquy because it's brilliant. But he's like, I'm like a ghost wandering around these people who don't know me and can't see me, and they have no use for me. He's a man who has to go to the Holy Land to utilize those aspects of himself that the gunslinger has to utilize, and the samurai and the Viking and the blonde beast of Nietzsche. He has to eschew politeness of society and use his killer instinct and overcome to survive. Then he comes back to polite society and they have no use for him anymore. And he's actually like a threat. So death is stalking him and death has to remove him. And all the people that he's surrounded by, right? Like they're not other veterans and stuff. They're like merchants and family people.
They're normies.
They're normies, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
In the context, yeah.
And they have this procession at the end of the Seventh Seal where he's saying like the dance of death goes on forever, you know. And it's just like at the end of Blood Meridian where they say he will never die. He will always be dancing. And he goes around and I can't remember who else he kills. He kills other people from the Glanton gang, but he has to go years later and hunt the kid down because the West is closed now. And the time for that type of man is over. And the judge's job is to come and take him out and remove him from society. He has to remove him from the dance floor. And he says when the warrior is removed, the dance becomes a false dance. And this is what the epilogue is. The epilogue is the guy with the post hole digger digging the holes for the fencing to cordon off the West, to put the fencing up and like create parameters and create boundaries to like turn it into something to like extract wealth from and to direct the flows of cattle who are commodity. Whereas before, the buffalo freely roamed across the West, and a fence is to stop that, is to cut that off. But he's the trailblazer, this guy. This is the guy with the vision who goes along. And then people behind him, right? In the epilogue are like scuttling along behind him. They're the bugmen. They're the men who are like not strong enough to do this. They're not strong enough to build the fence. They're not strong enough. The wild has been tamed and subdued. And I think that Nietzsche is probably like the most important person to inform you to understand Cormac McCarthy in general, but particularly this book. So,
go
ahead.
It's quite an interpretation, and I read Blood Meridian. To back up a step, I read Blood Meridian for the first time last year, and there's a lot to it, and I've kind of come around to your way of interpreting it. To back up a step. That was when I first came across your work. Was our friend TR Hudson we were talking about Blood Meridian. There was going to be a notion that we were going to talk about the book on the podcast we did with him on his novel Automaton, which was partially inspired, I think, by Blood Meridian. And he mentioned your blog as containing a really excellent essay on Blood Meridian, which was the one you referenced, the forced unity.
Yeah, you say it, Astral.
Yeah, it's okay, man. It's okay. It's a quote from the judge forcing the unity of existence. He says war forces the unity of existence.
Right, which is it's Nietzschean, but it's also Heraclitean.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Am I saying that right? Is that Heraclitean? Do you have to say the word clit every time you say it? Maybe. But yeah. Yeah, no, TR is basically who pointed me in your direction. And I read this essay. It was earlier this year, like within months of having finished Blood Meridian. And it was awesome. Definitely, I finally, not that not to overinterpret, there's always, things should always be open for interpretation, but on some level, it's like, I finally get it. And I would point anyone in the direction of forcing the unity of existence as a good essay to explain kind of what the book is all about. And just not to be remiss, you also have two essays on Blood Meridian. The other one being what was the other one called? Let me pull it up.
War is the father of us all.
Yes, which was as featured in Man's World 6, which is also a very good essay. Where was I going with this? Basically, like I recommend anyone should read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And if you're looking to kind of get a more intellectual like sense of what it's about, I basically agree with your interpretation, Astral. I did have one question on a nuance of it. And sorry if you're going to go on and make another point. Sorry for, I hope not distracting too much. But you mentioned it's kind of like the judge wants to kill the kid, or feels this need to kill the kid, the protagonist of the novel, because his time has passed. The West is closed. It is no longer the time and place for men like him. However, there's also an important, and you talk maybe a little more about this in War is the Father of All, that there's this element where the judge deems the kid to not be worthy of the open West, and not to be worthy of this role as one of the barbarians, because he shows mercy at a certain point, which is also something you get in Cormac McCarthy's other well-known novel, No Country for Old Men, with the character of Shigur, who people know him as played by Javier Bardem in the film adaptation. But he also, there's kind of a notion that he goes after his target after he shows mercy, gives water to a man in the desert. So I guess I'm curious, like, in your view, and I think it holds up to the text, but how do you kind of square that? There's almost this double thing going on where it's like the kid is both not enough of a barbarian, but then also too much of a barbarian. Once the West is closed, is it just kind of that? Not to overinterpret, is it just kind of a double reason, or what?
No, that's a great question. That is the quintessential question, because it's, for me anyway. So I'm glad you picked up on that. Because these went into Man's World, the Nietzsche one too, the failed Übermensch. All of these were written for publications. The failed Übermensch, actually, there's a funny story behind that I won't get into at the moment. Ended up not going into the magazine it was going to go into, but the point is I cut them all short. Like they were all like twice as long, and I had to take a bunch out. And part of the reason why the War is the Father of Us All essay even exists is because I couldn't really explain what I was saying at the end of Forcing the Unity of Existence, where I say that the judge tells the kid he's killing him for a paradoxical reason, which I mean like he's killing them for the exact opposite reason that he says. And then I just leave it at that. And you absolutely need to have that backed up. Like, it needs to be expounded upon. Hence the second essay. Because I say that he killed him to take him out of the dance floor, to remove the warrior from the liberal institutions, from the developing society, because it's not his time anymore. But he says it's because he wasn't cut out for being the frontiersman. He says he didn't have what it takes. Now, this is highly speculative. I feel like many of the other claims I make are solidly backed up by the book. And I feel like I might be stretching or reaching a little bit with this, but the conclusion I've come to is that the kid is a man or a character in transition, while someone like Toad, because remember, he was 15 when he got into this.
Yeah.
So he wasn't a fully developed adult yet. And there is a motif, there is precedence in other works for this character in transition who was born in a different time, but he's of the later time. He's of another time.
Yeah.
The kid was 15 when the book starts, and every other person around him was a grown man. Toadvine, the Colonel, they were veterans. Most of these guys were veterans. A few of them were just long-time career criminals, but they were all grown men, and they had been living this life for the amount of time the kid was alive. So by the time the West is closed, the kid, I think you can do the math. I think he's like 35, 45, something like that. The judge is saying to him, like, you never really were one of us the whole time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You didn't really have what it takes. Like, I don't even know. And this is my words now. Like, I don't even know how you made it this far. Like, you weren't supposed to make it this far. So it's my job to take you out. And if that's the case, right, that he's not cut out for it and he's not one of us and he didn't really have what it takes. If that's the case, what that means to me is that he is on the cusp of two worlds. He was born of an age to be like this new man, this new last man, or this new bug man, but he got thrown in to this other world, and he did what he had to do to make it, but it wasn't really who he was. Now, when I say there's precedence, you see this motif a few places. I mentioned it in The Unforgiven, right? Because at the end you have the old man who's already lived through the Old West and the frontier's life, and he was an outlaw. And then you have the young man who wants to be that, but it's too late. Like, that time is gone, and he can't, and he doesn't have the stomach for it. Another example of where this motif shows up, and I'm going to be doing an episode about this, is the movie Valhalla Rising. Have you seen that?
I have not, but it is on my list.
It is.
I've heard good things.
Very Kino. It's one of the most Kino movies you'll ever see. It's one of the most masculine movies of all time. The most testosterone driven, purely masculine. I don't believe a female shows up anywhere in the movie ever.
That's the appropriate Bechdel test, by the way.
Yeah, right. Nicholas,
if there's no women in the movie, it's probably a good movie.
Yeah, I don't remember there being a woman in the movie, and it's Nicholas Refn, and
oh yeah, he's great. Yeah,
he's great, and the fucking mainstream hates him, and they shit all over this movie, because it's too. This guy's like John Milius. This guy's like the rebirth of John Milius, and Valhalla Rising is one of the best movies of all time. You have to go see it. But what's his name? The Danish guy. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, but he's one eye. In the movie, he's only got one eye.
And
Mads Mikkelsen. Thank you.
Just in case our audience doesn't, I'm just giving some context here. Winding reference, the one who made Drive, and Too Old to Die Young. And yes, I don't know. I figure some people in our audience has probably seen Drive, but might not be aware of.
I would suspect all of our audience has seen Drive.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's one of the main movies, and I got a lot to say about that movie too. But
I'm sure
it's off the topic. But
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Valhalla Rising.
Valhalla Rising. Yeah.
Oh, I was just talking about how the motif of the character born too late or too early, and this goes back to everything I'm saying about Mishima, right? Mishima is the avatar. I think the reason why BAP promotes him so much is Mishima is the fucking avatar for all of us who feel like we were born in the wrong time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in Valhalla Rising, this dude takes a state into like a gladiator who's, his cat, and he escapes, and he's the fully grown man. He fully embodied who was a Christian boy, like, born because is from Norway or wherever. So he was a pagan with him. And he goes on his whole entire adventure with him. And he's the kid from another time, or for the future. And I think the kid represents the future of Western Europe, the synthesis of pagan and Christian Europe to birth new Western Europe, Christendom, after the year 1000. So the killing machine who embodies that era and that type of manhood, who's got the younger sidekick with him who like isn't really cut out for it. And I think the kid is that younger kid who's not really cut out for it. And why I put it in an essay with Apocalypse Now and Colonel Kurtz is because that predicament and that state of affairs and that relationship is what Colonel Kurtz is talking about when he tells the story of inoculating the children. And then when they leave the village, the Viet Cong come in and cut all their arms off.
Yeah.
Right. And I say in the essay that this is not a country that has any fucking business. If you go there to inoculate their children, you have no business invading another country because you don't have what it takes to make war on another person, another people, and do what it takes to win. And Colonel Kurtz recognizes that. And Colonel Kurtz, when he saw that, he realized, like, fuck, I'm on the losing side. I'm with the wrong people. These are the guys who have what it takes to be the true warrior spirit. And he defects and he goes to the other side. And, you know, I'm going to dedicate a whole episode to Apocalypse Now as well. So I don't want to like give away my read of the movie, but basically, like, I don't say this in the essay, but James Frazier spends a lot of time in the Golden Bough talking about like the ritual killing of the king to like usher in the next generation. And that if you don't kill the king, like with the ritual killing, like he gets old and sclerotic and it turns into like a gerontocracy and the culture can't thrive anymore. And John Milius was thinking about this explicitly with the killing of Kurtz by Martin Sheen, because the Golden Bough is seen on the shelf in the background in one of the scenes. I think it's in the scene with Kurtz, but it might have been in the beginning. I can't remember now, but it shows up in the book. But it's not as cut and dry as that in that movie because Charlie Sheen doesn't kill him in order to like take his place. He kills him to remove him from the milieu, the military milieu and the military scene, so that he doesn't fucking become an example to the other soldiers that like you can go off the reservation and you can become your own fucking demigod in the jungle and become a warlord. It's just like the judge removing the kid and Death removing the Crusader in the Seventh Seal. Like this guy who's embodying this other type of man, this other type of manhood and manliness needs to be redacted because he is going to awaken that in others, and we will not have the fucking order that we have. So it's not really like the ritual killing of the king to like changing of the guard at all, even though Milius like put that in there on purpose, I guess Coppola could have done it too, but I had one of the highlights of my entire life was to talk to Amanda Milius. Yeah. And one of the things she said to me off air, because we were talking about that movie, we never got to it, was that her dad, of course she would say this, but just, go with it. That her dad was like way smarter than he was given credit for. And that some of the stuff that the actors were given credit for like putting into it, or that the directors were like, he already had, like he had a vision. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like Apocalypse Now, according to her, was his vision. And Coppola, there's a documentary where it says like, Coppola's like, okay, I don't know if I can pull this off because this is fucking crazy feat. If I can't do it, George Lucas is going to take over. And if George Lucas can't take over, it's going to go to Milius. Like Milius will be the director. Yeah. So like, I think whatever. I don't know. I guess I'm speculating, but I revere Milius probably more than anybody else in Hollywood, mainly for Conan the Barbarian and Apocalypse Now.
No, so absolutely. I mean, to pivot slightly, but also kind of pivot back and like bring some different elements together here. Why don't you think there's ever been a movie of Blood Meridian? Like it seems like, and I'll give my answer in a nutshell. It seems like there's a lot of stuff in it that would lend itself really well to the cinematic form. I mean, just imagine that last post-hole digger epilogue and everything and all the symbolism there. And obviously there is a lot of cinematic stuff in it. But I haven't researched it extensively, but I don't think there's ever been even, anything really significant written, like any scripts written based off of Blood Meridian. And I don't think it's ever really had any priors. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like what about Blood Meridian is like unfilmable or?
Yeah, anything I say will be pretty speculative because
Right,
I
of
don't
course,
think there's anything out there explaining why, except James Franco bought or at least bid on. I think he purchased the rights to that. I think James Franco
Did
has
he? Okay.
the rights.
And you know more about it than me, but I wouldn't doubt it because he did make a movie of some Faulkner.
Well, he made a movie of Child of God as well. The McCarthy
Right.
book,
I
Child of
haven't
God.
seen it. But yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, he did a decent job. I mean, Child of God is good enough for sure. I remember I like somehow talked to the star of that movie on Twitter. I say star, it's a very small movie. But he was a nice guy, and he was appreciative that I said he did a good job.
What's that
stuff.
guy's name out of curiosity?
I'd have to look it up. I don't remember now.
Anyway.
But so they tell me James Franco owns the rights to that movie.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
And people say it's unfilmable for like X, Y, and Z reasons. I don't know if that's true. Like the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is like the relentless violence. But if you watch Game of Thrones, I mean, it's not really any worse than Game of Thrones. Like, I don't really think there's anything in Blood Meridian that would be more offensive than some things that I've seen, especially some things in Game of Thrones. So I don't exactly know why, but I like to think that it's because the book is so revered and so highly respected that like nobody feels up to the task of taking it on.
I think that's ultimately what it is.
Yeah, I hope that's
well.
what it is.
And not only that people are not up to the task, but also that like it just maybe shouldn't be done. I hear Brett Easton Ellis talks about this on his podcast a lot. I think it's accurate. Good books don't always make good movies. Bad books can make good movies. It's like they are significantly different art forms. Now, some books are a little more cinematic than others and lend themselves pretty well. But a book like Blood Meridian, the things it accomplishes with its language, you just can't translate that to screen. Or if you can, you'd have to be pretty fucking special to do so. So I think that I think that people aren't up to the task and like maybe shouldn't even try it. It's just too much of a beast. And for as clearly as I can imagine certain scenes, I just don't think it would. The
Coen brothers did a really good job though with No Country.
Oh, absolutely, because that book is very cinematic, and we were talking about this a little bit with like this with Dan and I in prep for this, the stylistic shift in McCarthy. I haven't read nearly all of his books, but I've read Blood Meridian, and I've read some of the more recent ones, including No Country for Old Men and The Road, both of which have movies made about them. I haven't seen The Road. Looks okay. No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, you don't need to see it. It's not terrible, but it like doesn't add anything.
Yeah,
it's all right.
But yeah, no, I think his later books become, he's kind of operating in a space that's somewhere between Faulkner and Hemingway, I would say, to oversimplify a bit, because he's very much his own style as well. But you could, there's a Hemingway element to McCarthy and a Faulkner element. And it seems like he's kind of gotten a little closer to the Hemingway element later on, and that those books are they're a little easier to read on some level and a little more cinematic. But there's
a reason for that. Not to interrupt you.
No, go. I'm curious to hear because I was thinking about it earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a reason for that. And I mean, it's very astute observation to liken him to Hemingway in that sense, because he was moving towards writing screenplays, and like he wrote a screenplay and a play. So he was very much thinking about like being a film writer, and his books being turned into movies. The last two in particular, like he overtly knew. I don't know if he had like a deal yet, but he had worked in Hollywood, like writing. There had been a movie made, I think it's called Sunset Limited. And then there's also a play. I just can't remember if the play was separate or if Sunset Limited. No, I think it was a play and a script. So he definitely had it in his mind for No Country for Old Men and The Road being turned into movies. Whether or not the deals came through before or after he wrote them, I don't know. But that would totally explain what you're picking up on.
Yeah.
Interesting, because the way we broke it down and the discussion it led for me and Matt was how obviously he's a very masculine writer, and how even in the context of masculine themes and masculine styles, you have writers like Hemingway who have a very sparse, stereotypically masculine style, and then you have more verbose writers like Faulkner, Fitzgerald, and yes, earlier McCarthy. And nevertheless, even though kind of the long, winding lyrical style is less stereotypically masculine, it still packs a punch. That's for sure.
Definitely McCarthy. It does, It's
and I mean, I would say with Faulkner.
Yeah. It's like,
and
it's very colorful writing, but is not floral. It's almost lurid in parts, and it's just there's really nothing quite right like it. It's hard to describe, but it's
that's a really good word, floral. I like that a lot. Did you guys see Faulkner's tough. Faulkner's actually the most difficult I've ever read.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely.
Did you guys read Absalom or see the movie Django Unchained?
I've seen Django Unchained.
I started Absalom.
Yeah.
I did not finish.
I couldn't finish it either, dude.
But I did see Django Unchained.
I couldn't finish it either, but so but I did read a lot of it, and I couldn't make hide nor hair of a lot of it, which is funny because like As I Lay Dying and The Unvanquished are like totally different. The prose is like very clear and concise.
Yeah. But the interesting thing, I don't mean to cut in.
No,
but
please go ahead.
The Sound and the Fury, like it's so interesting that in that book that he writes from 4 different perspectives, and the virtuosity needed, because like not only does he write from different perspectives, but his style changes, and it's amazing to be like reading a chapter, and like the son, Quentin, he's more of a philosopher, so it's meandering, ponderous language. And then like the older son is like a salesman or something like that, and he's like a kind of aggressive, unhappy guy. And so like it's more like kind of like comedic, but also like stark language. And to like, as being a writer, to be able to kind of experiment with different styles, that's that's an evidence of talent.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, and it's ballsy too.
Yeah.
But after I failed to finish Absalom, I didn't even pick up The Sound and the Fury. But you said, like, one of you guys said, I don't know, I feel like you were like when you said Faulkner is like a masculine writer, and did you mean like his prose is masculine, or like
his themes,
right,
and
his subject matter,
I mean, maybe not as obviously as Hemingway or even McCarthy, but nevertheless he has I don't even want to describe it stupidly. Just the way his view on the world is not sugar coated. It is a masculine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, crucially, he's dealing with the issues of being a man. So,
and that too, of course.
You're going to be a masculine writer if you're concerned with what it means to be a man. I mean, regardless of how you decide to answer that question, you're going to be discussing it in masculine way.
Yeah. I bring up Absalom because I never thought about it like this before until you said that. But there's the Absalom is about like a college kid who goes away. I think he goes to like Princeton or like a Harvard. He goes to an Ivy League school, but he's from the South, obviously. And he comes back and he's like going through his mom's or his grandma's house or something like that, and he's like uncovering like the past of his family. And you have this stark contrast, just like what I'm talking about with these other works, of this young, academic man who goes to a city to like start that type of life, coming back and like rediscovering his roots of his family, of like this masculine man. and one of his ancestors, like I think it was his grandfather, his great grandfather, had this like reputation for being this like big burly brute, and he like staked out, just like in Blood Meridian, he like staked out where their house was going to be, and he like, you know, cut down the trees himself, but he also had this fucking clan of slaves that were like fighters, that he like used them to like go and fight other people's slaves, and they were like the most badass slave fighters of all, and he was known to be able to like fuck them all up. Like he was like the toughest one of all of them. And I mentioned Django because that I always wondered if Leonardo DiCaprio's character was based on that guy. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Because he has the slave fighters. But I'm now seeing this contrast between the man of like a later, more civil and subdued time and the manhood of that, and the Bugman, you know, last man, the Nietzschean last man, contrasted to the man of an earlier time who's, you know, much more vitalistic.
Yeah.
So I gotta go back and finish the book. That is the toughest book I've ever read in my life, though. I didn't make it. I think I made it 200 pages, and it's like maybe a 250, 300 page book.
Yeah. His you know, style has a way of kind of like winding back on itself, and the language is, you know, sometimes a bit impenetrable.
Well,
I find
McCarthy has like really beautiful prose, stark beautiful prose, whereas like I don't remember Faulkner having that except in As I Lay Dying, and even in As I Lay Dying, it's like few and far between.
Right.
These, like,
well,
really...
yeah, that's where it's like in between, you know, Hemingway and Faulkner. It's like a little bit of that Faulknerian. Again, I don't know how to describe it quite, but a little, you know, not quite stream of consciousness, but, you know, very, very imagistic writing, but then like grounded in that Hemingway masculine, very to the point style. Makes McCarthy a really happy medium. I mean, I've read Hemingway, I've read McCarthy, and I've read Faulkner. I think McCarthy is probably my favorite of those three writers, because I think he splits the difference between the other two really well.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I think he probably does have the best prose. Honestly, man, I wish I spoke in other languages because I could have a better perspective on this next point, this next observation. But the only prose I've ever read that holds up to McCarthy's that's as good as his is in translation. Borges, for example. Not to say that McCarthy is like Borges, but the prose is just as rich. Borges is more frequently, you know, because with McCarthy too, it's like few and far between where he has these like really stunning passages that stay with you. Borges, sometimes the whole story is like nothing but that, and it's like musical, like dancing through a story, and the images and the metaphors and the it's almost like prose poetry, but it's, of course, it's in translation. So I have to imagine in Spanish it's even better. And I don't know, you know, if you read the original Spanish, if you could even compare him to someone like McCarthy. I wish I, you know.
My Spanish is not that great. I have actually read a little Borges in Spanish, but I was barely able to read it, so I can't opine really.
Have you read him in English though? Like in any extent? Yeah, he's.
Oh yeah, no, I like Borges quite a bit.
He's a big influence on Zero. You can see.
Oh yeah, we talked about that Zero bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Shit, I gotta go back and listen. I listened to that.
No, it's all good. Yeah. Well, again, obviously you've done your own interviews with a lot of these folks, so you're familiar with what they have to say. But you know, hopefully every interview adds a little something different to the.
No, it does. It feels great to be like on the podcast circuit, because there are people, you know, especially like academics, dude, especially fucking guys who wrote a book for some university press that they work for. And they're going on the podcast circuit, like pitching the book, and like each show they say the same thing. You know what I mean? Which I guess, you know, I don't want to hold it against them. I've never written.
Yeah, no, we all repeat ourselves, but like.
But no, I don't feel like our guys do that. I really don't. Like, I don't. Zero's interview with you and with me is nothing like each other. They're totally different. And same with Roeg Nationals. Like, he came on my show and we talked about one of his essays for like half the show or more,
There's
and the
always
dude,
there's always a million different to give you Borgesian about it. Actually, there's always it's a garden of forking paths. There's always a million different ways to go, a million different directions, and there's so much going on in our sphere. And everyone has so much writing out there that I mean, I from this conversation, I feel like we could probably just talk for hours.
I think one of the issues is that, like in the normie podcast circuit, they exist as vehicles. They exist as vehicles to promote.
Yeah, I know, man. I know. Just getting started.
Yeah, no, I was just saying the normie podcast circuit, they exist as vehicles to promote books and promote movies and what have you. Whereas like what we're doing here, like we're actually trying to have real conversations with people.
Yeah.
And so every episode is going to be a real conversation because you're not trying to sell your book on our podcast. Like, yes, maybe, you want people to listen to your podcast, but the real reason you're here is to talk to us. And that's the reason we're here.
It's the conversation. And we did a little bit of banter off air. So if I'm repeating myself, I don't think I said this on the air. I meant to say it in the beginning. You guys are coming on my show. I mean, it has to happen.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I remember now that.
I mean, I got to promote my books.
That's what I was going to say, dude. Like, you guys are both published with Terror House. And like, I mean, I think what that dude is doing is fucking badass. And someone once said to me that he's one of the most prolific selling independent publishers in the world. I don't know if that's true. I hope it's true.
He might be.
He so Matt Forney, he used to be like a Manosphere guy, and I don't know what all the details are, but he definitely was self-publishing books. Like, now a lot of people do, but like not a lot of people were doing it back then.
Right.
So I don't know if he'd rank like world class or not. I'd be curious to hear from him, but like. No, definitely he is a six, and he's got a lot of enemies too, but like for the most part is a success story at promoting himself online. And
man.
Yeah,
and
Terror House is a great kind of development of his career. I mean, he's been involved in a lot of different scenes. I think he himself would say he's had some kind of false starts and stops, but he's been doing Terror House for like 4 or 5 years now. It seems maybe a little less time than that, but I know the idea has been around since at least like 2018, and it really seems like he's kind of finally Matt Forney has like finally hit his niche, and that Terror House is a big success.
Yeah, and you guys had not Matt Forney, you had Billy Pratt on. He's one of my favorite dudes. His book was great.
Oh, yeah.
And, I just tweeted this today that Matt Forney is single-handedly keeping the spirit of like rock and roll literary fucking outlaws alive.
Oh, yeah.
Like some of the shit
Absolutely.
that guy tweets, man. Like, I just posted this video today of Al Jorgensen. I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's the lead singer of Ministry, which is kind of like an underground. I mean, I wouldn't say underground, but they're
an industrial metal band. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like talking about how fucking crazy the scene was back then. And I'm just like, it's part of my whole problem, like before I came here, is like, I was like, that's gone. Like that type of guy is gone. And that type of culture is gone. And I discovered it here, and Matt Forney embodies it like Zero does and like Bap does. Like he is that fucking spirit of the like crazy fucking rock star playing heavy riffs, like getting fucked up and like crashing and burning, but somehow like still going. Like,
well, yeah, like, you bring up go on. Sorry.
No. I'm just saying, like, the dude should be crashing and burning, but instead, like, he's still driving forward and like still going, and like that spirit isn't dead. It's just underground, and like that dude is one of the people that has it.
Definitely,
absolutely,
and like
back. Go on, man.
At risk of sounding almost like I'm inflating us too much, I think this does tie into the Blood Meridian conversation. The West has been closed since, what did you say, 1880? And maybe we're all kind of bug men compared to the bandits who founded new nations. But it did live on the spirits, that sort of outsider frontier spirit, I think, lived on for a while. That subterranean spirit, as Kerouac would have described, it's lived on in, you know, and Bap talks about, you know, the filthy edges of things. It's lived on in varying degrees, but one major place that it lived on was in culture. And not that I think that like getting smashed at like a rock and roll show in the 60s or 70s or even 80s or 90s, not that I think that was like the absolute pinnacle of culture. It was still something. There was still a subterranean element where a certain energy was there. But I think what's happened in our lifetime is that even that last pittance we had of some kind of frontier findable in something like subculture or rock and roll or basically the arts, even that has closed off. So now we have, again, not to inflate us too much, because, you know, we're not exactly out founding new nations per se yet, but we are kind of subterraneans online. And I say, you know, I won't even apologize for that. Like, that is what we are.
Correct.
You know?
It's absolutely correct.
It's absolutely what this is all about, and about, you know, cultivating the land of this subculture is all about. You know.
Well, when you still have that, like, that vibrancy in your culture and running through some of your people, and you're not in that time, it's going to manifest itself in things like art. It's going to show up in literature. It's going to show up in music. It's going to be that aggressive sound, or
right.
the Hunter S. Thompson, you know.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
even
it's going to also
use,
show up in drug use. Exactly.
So there's a positive and negative side to it. I think I am pretty mostly anti-drug in my life. You know, obviously Hunter S. Thompson probably did that more productively than some others. There's all kinds of different ways. Some of them are quite degenerate and bad. Some of them not. I mean, I'm also reminded of our conversation with Rye Nationalist last week. And I'm sure he said this elsewhere too. Like, he talks, and some bodybuilder or other talked about lifting and lifting weights as basically war by other means. And there's things like that. And that's a good example of something that's very productive. And I don't think it's like, I don't think it's like sublimation in like a Freudian sense where you're just like exercise. I mean, it is that, like, you are exercising the energy,
right.
But if you do that in a way that makes you stronger and that puts something new into the world, whether it's, you know, bodybuilding or writing or creating culture, you're at least doing something. And again, where does this lead? Where, you know, that gets into the biggest question of all, is like, where is all this leading politically? I don't, none of us know, you know, but we're strengthening ourselves physically and spiritually.
Just to sort of bookend this whole portion of the conversation, to bring it back to the very beginning, is we have to struggle with Zarathustra, because I don't think Nietzsche is talking about a guy who sublimates this warrior instinct into art. I think he's talking about the rebirth of the warrior instinct, and our task is, if we accept Nietzsche's diagnosis of the predicament that we're in, and if we accept his prescription, our task is to figure out like what to do with that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like how do we go forward? So
yeah,
I mean, I'm going to ask you guys that when you come on my show, because some version of that question, but I'm really interested in. Go ahead.
Has actually kind of answered that. He wrote a very good essay, which I keep plugging, called The Renaissance of the Ritual.
I do. I'm not a prolific. Well, you on.
In that essay, he describes how going forward, we may not be at the point where we can found new traditions, but the old traditions have been contaminated to some extent. And what the work we have to do now is laying the groundwork for the formation of new traditions.
Yeah, well, it's not even, I have to not take credit, because, like, I mean, I'm basically quoting and paraphrasing Bap and other Frog Twitter people, but I'm not as prolific of a blogger as you, Astral, but that's pretty much the main Substack piece I've written in recent memory, was this piece that even the title is taken from Mike Ma, The Renaissance of the Ritual.
But you added your own gloss.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not.
This was yours.
I'm not.
You just try to be modest, man, but you just own it. This is you got to steal that shit. And
I'm pretty sad. It's one of the better nonfiction things I've ever written, and I'm very satisfied with the degree to which where I add my own flavor. However, I have to say that the origin of a lot of the ideas are a lot of the writers and a lot of the figures that we've been talking about for this entire conversation, and that the basic notion of founding a new tradition, well, that's not me, but I kind of lend my 2 cents on, you know, what the way I've tried to kind of experiment with that in my life. But but the basic point definitely stands. It's, I think that, and the quote, and it is a quote from BAP about laying, not even founding new traditions, but laying the groundwork, making space. He talks about the ownership of space, but in this case, it's even just, sort of cultivating the space or just finding the space, physical or not, where such a thing could even be possible. Because the issue, of course, that BAP talks about, is the ownership of space. Now everything is owned, and it's this terrible condition that we're in. But the question is, what are this? I don't even, you gotta. It's kind of abstract to talk about, but like, what is the spiritual positioning that we had to put ourselves in to even be able to start to think about what founding a new tradition will be like? I think that's what BAP lays out the question for him, and that's kind of the understanding that I've come into of our situation. Thanks to a lot of Frog Twitter people, but even you could even find that, I think, if you read Blood Meridian in the right way, that this is the condition of the West and of our culture. Does that resonate?
Yeah, of course. Well, go ahead.
Not to be too grandiose, I think that's kind of what we're all doing here. I know that the mission statement for New Right, our goal is to, help cultivate a space for new writers and new thinkers to get their thoughts out there. And I think Astral, that's, kind of your project.
Yeah,
too.
big time. I like putting my own thoughts out in essays, and I hope to keep doing it. But the podcast is certainly more about showcasing other people, especially since I don't have a body of work. I mean, it's great that you guys have your own novels. What are the titles again? I know you said it in other episodes.
Mine is not. Oh, yeah. Go on, man.
My novel's called Dragon Day. That one came out about I think maybe a year ago to the day, actually, in maybe a serendipitous moment. With Terror House, Dragon Day. Yeah.
And mine is called Nutcranker, and it has not yet been published, but it is forthcoming from Terror House.
All right, good. Well, you guys will come on my show, and we'll promote those, and we'll
shout it out. Yeah, we feel like we've just kind of scratched the surface of stuff that we can get into. So, we'll definitely be happy to go on yours. Yeah.
I really can't express enough how much I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to kind of lay out that whole vision with Blood Meridian and how Nietzsche plays into it. And
it was great, absolutely great stuff. And I would direct anyone towards your blog, but also I think you did a really good job of summing it all up and how it all connects. We talked about Nietzsche, we talked about Crime and Punishment and Blood Meridian, and it's on your part, Astral, I think it's a very singular vision, and I'm glad that our show could be a place where you lay that out, and people can also, of course, find your work on your Substack and as a frequent contributor to Man's World. Are you going to be in the next one?
Yeah, if I can get my shit together, because I'm so busy with this podcast and having a family and everything. I'd like to think I'd be a much more prolific writer if I didn't have so much on my plate. But
writing takes a lot of time. I mean, that's.
But my Twitter, which by the way, I should have said this in the beginning, it's at AFScast, and I go by Darkstar there because I got suspended as Astral, and then the algorithm found me, so I can't use the same name, but Astral just means star. So it's Darkstar, and what was I saying? Oh, so I use like the threads that I do as like rough drafts for like the next. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one of my threads. I try to do them every couple of weeks. They're basically like rough drafts that like will get turned into essays or podcast episodes or something. At least that's the idea. And I did one on the Dragon's Horde and the Bank Robber, and how like the modern day iteration of the knight or the group of knights, laying siege to the dragon's cave to kill it and take the horde, manifests in the bank robber. And like the bank is the dragon, and the knights are the robbers. And these guys are the embodiment of this earlier type of man coming to the surface within greater society of the liberal institutions. Not to say that word, that phrase so many times, but but as you can see though, that theme like runs through like my entire basically I have a Nietzschean read on culture and literature, like the subterranean and the time of the man of the past not yet being or having gone by. It's kind of like, but I see it everywhere now. You know what I mean? I see it everywhere. There's other examples I didn't even throw out there. So and I'm actually looking at taking that further, this concept of the bank robber and the dragon's hoard to now, which would be like what I'm calling, actually I haven't called them this yet. This is the first time I said it out loud, like the digital pirates. Like I talked about this with Milius because she's doing a movie on John McAfee.
Right.
Oh yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, she's so fucking based. John McAfee, Kim.com, Hans Ulbrich or whatever. I always fuck his name up. The guy William Ulbrich from the Silk Road.
Yeah.
These types of guys are like the new and just hackers in general. Anonymous, those guys, even though whatever, they're like supposedly like leftist anarchists, they're really just fucking, I did a thread on them too. They're really just like criminals, those guys, even though they like supposedly had this like Rage Against the Machine bent to their work. They were really, what they were doing in their day-to-day lives though was stealing like mad amounts of money, hacking people and shit. So those guys are like the digital version of the bank robbers. And the digital version of the Bronze Age pirate or whatever.
Yeah, no. So that's potentially for Man's World 7.
Yeah, he asked me to do it, and I said I would, but I haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh yeah, well I get that because that's a big topic. You know what I mean? Like if I see where you're going with it, but like you could definitely. It sounds like something that could be hard to write because you're dealing with some widespread phenomenon. Yeah.
It's more because I have 3 kids.
Oh, and that too, of course. But, all right. Well, we're coming up on like I think like the 2.5 hour mark. You may be record for our longest show.
You may be our record here. You may have stolen it from Gio.
Gio,
man, I'll never be able to out-talk Gio. I'll never be able to out-talk Gio.
You might have. We'll see.
I think you just did.
Oh no.
But so we should wrap up for now. But we look forward to going on your show in the near future and just keeping this conversation. I mean, you're obviously welcome to come back on ours at some point too. Like we'll keep these conversations going. But I will give you, I was talking about your blog and Man's World, and obviously you promote your podcast. So I think you promoted a lot, but if there's anything else you want to flag to our listeners' attention before we wrap up here, I already find our comments from YouTube.
Yeah, I've been honored. You guys have honored me, and I hope I didn't lose anybody and make their eyes glaze over.
No, I think we covered great territory here, and I'm psyched.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you guys have a great show, man.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, you do too, of course.
You do.